After a 2-week lull, the Viet Minh renewed their offensive. The battle raged for a fortnight, with the French contesting every foot of ground. In the end, shocking Viet Minh casualties forced General Giap to pause. Meanwhile, the French situation was getting desperate. Ammunition and food was short, and 3,000 wounded were trapped inside the base in appalling conditions. With disaster looming on the battlefield, the French appealed to the United States for help. There was a plan to use American bombers and even to drop 4 nuclear weapons, which was codenamed Operation Vulture. But Eisenhower ruled out any American military intervention unless other allies took part. None agreed to help. The French at Dien Bien Phu were to be left to their fate. Although the outpost Isabelle was still in French hands, it was by now cut off from the central stronghold at Dien Bien Phu. Besieged by the Viet Minh 304th Division, Isabelle was under heavy artillery fire. Incredibly, although attacked time and time again, the post would hold out until the very end of the battle. In the central sector, Strong Point Françoise had been abandoned, and the Viet Minh had captured Dominique along with part of Elian and Huguet. However, there were 2 new strong points, Sparrowhawk and Juno. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh had adopted new tactics in an attempt to reduce their terrible casualties. Secretly, they had dug more than 50 miles of trenches, creeping right up to the French perimeter. The final Viet Minh assault came on the night of May 1st, 1954. After a massive barrage, the Viet Minh infantry hit the remaining bunkers of Huguet and Elian. In spite of fierce French resistance, positions fell one by one until, on the evening of the 6th day, a huge mine demolished part of Elian and its last bunkers were overrun. At 5:30 p.m. on May 7, 1954, Vietnamese forces occupied the French command post, and the French commander ordered his troops to cease fire. It was 55 days to the minute since the battle had begun. At Dien Bien Phu, 3,000 French troops had been killed and 8,000 wounded. The Viet Minh had suffered much worse, with more than 8,000 dead and 12,000 wounded. But for them, the outcome had still been a triumph. On the eve of an international conference on Indochina, they had shattered France's resolve to carry on the war. The Viet Minh expected that the negotiations at Geneva would open the way for full Vietnamese independence and a major role for them in running the new country. In fact, the Viet Minh negotiators faced bitter disappointment. Behind closed doors, Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai struck a deal with the French and forced Ho Chi Minh to agree that the country be divided into 2 zones. There was to be a ceasefire, but there would be no immediate decision about who was to control Vietnam until elections settled the future. After Dien Bien Phu, the Viet Minh had controlled nearly 3/4 of Vietnam and parts of Laos and Cambodia. At the peace conference, Laos and Cambodia were confirmed as independent states, but Vietnam was divided at the 17th parallel. The Viet Minh were given control of the northern part, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, with its capital in Hanoi. In the south, the state of Vietnam was to be run from Saigon. A demilitarized zone was established between the two regions. By agreement, 190,000 French-led troops would be withdrawn from North to South Vietnam. 80,000 Viet Minh troops in the south, mostly Southerners, would go to the north. For the French, the prospect of withdrawing from the northern part of Vietnam was deeply humiliating. However, they still assumed France would continue to play a major role in the south. The illusion would not last for long. France's role was already being taken over by the United States. On September 8, 1954, at a conference in the Philippines, the U.S. sponsored the creation of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which would soon include South Vietnam. The Americans were now dealing directly with the new South Vietnamese government, led by Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem. They had begun to bypass the French completely. On October 9, 1954, the Viet Minh 308th Division, veterans of Dien Bien Phu, marched in triumph into Hanoi, in accordance with the Geneva Agreement. At the same time, the last French troops in the north prepared to leave. With them went 850,000 refugees, encouraged by a CIA black propaganda campaign and fearing for their future under Viet Minh rule. Before the very eyes of the French and the Vietnamese people, Vietnam was crystallizing into two separate states, each with its own government, its own army, and its own Cold War allies. For Ho Chi Minh, the North Vietnamese president, the years following the Geneva Agreement were bitterly disappointing. Ho was adored by millions of Vietnamese, North and South, as the man who'd driven out the French. But he had only won half a victory. South Vietnam, backed by the United States, refused to hold the elections that had been agreed at Geneva, the elections Ho had counted on, in which the U.S. knew he would win, to reunify the country. Everything pointed to the fact